Good morning. My name is Pelle Kronestedt. I am the Managing Director for Center for Photography. And Center for Photography is a physical and a digital meeting place and an obvious part of collaborations related to photography in Sweden. And we'll come to international later on. CFF operates throughout the country for our members and for the general public. Conversations about photography are at the center. The Center for Photography connects various photographic events through the country and is a knowledge hub and connection center for everything that happens in photography field in Sweden. The heart of the photography, the heart for Center for Photography is its members. We welcome those active in the photographic field, photographers, curators, researchers, that's new, and others. CFF stands in the middle of the photographic scene and can and wants to lead its members into the future labor market. CFF supports its members through job promoting initiatives and offers continuing education courses, exhibition opportunities, and the creation of networks. CFF leads a conversation about the challenging conditions of the photographic field and provides tools for a sustainable professional life. And we like to operate throughout the country. And this is also very important for us to be here in Landskrona, to be part of Skåne, as well being very much in part of Västra Götaland. All right, so photography and research project was started in 2019 with a successful workshop where a large number of active people from the photography field participated and discussed what is going on in Swedish photographic research today. In 2021, a roundtable discussion, Thoughts on Photography, was held where current photographic issues were discussed. In the roundtable discussions under the headings, what is photography, what are photography's platforms, and who is a photographer? Now we're here, and we continued the major initiative Thoughts on Photography with artistic research. We want to follow up the discussion with 1 or 2 more in-depth programs during next year, where participants who took part can further discuss the same theme. And we're very welcoming, and we're very happy to have a conversation between Cecilia Järdemar, Björn, Larsson, Johan, Eriksson about challenges and conditions in artistic research. So all the light on you here on stage, and I will go around with a microphone after your conversation. So please welcome.
Okay, thank you, Pelle. Thanks for inviting us, and thank you for coming here and listening. So the format is that me and Johan, who work together, will start by presenting our project called Refuse to Kill. And then after Cecilia's presentation, there will be a joint discussion where you are very welcome to contribute. So, Refuse to Kill. So one of our working method has been asking others to contribute. We have, through advertisement, through collection seminars, and through outreach activities, looking for photographs, films, other documentation, and stories. And when asking this question, please help us contribute, we felt the need to be very open about ourselves and create an open and transparent platform. And at this platform, an archive could slowly develop, and where we also could present and share our ongoing work and ongoing publications. So we are now going to use this homepage, also with the name Refuse to Kill, stories of the inte unconscious but conscientious objectors, to make this presentation. So who are we then? We are 2 artists in collaboration in this project. We are not one. And the negotiations in between us has developed to be a large part of our working method. I myself have a background studying at the photography program at the University of Gothenburg a long time ago. And since then, I have my own artistic practice alongside with my freelance photographer and also as an educator of fine art and photography. So to give one example of the work I do on my own, I will present something called Brandplats 3. It's an example of an artwork using, if you like, to research-like documentary practices. And my method at this project was to walk and to photograph the same landscape during a 10-year period, building up a visual archive, and at the same time searching and collecting written material from authorities involved in a rescue operation following a devastating forest fire in the Swedish National Park Tyresta. And the result of my work usually are presented in exhibition format and in publications.
Yes, my name is Johan, and I have a similar background as Björn, and I also educated in Gothenburg. At that time it was called Fotohögskolan. And we are both former conscientious objectors as well. I also have like a background as a reportage photographer in the late 80s and beginning of 90s. I worked for Svenska Dagbladet and Dagens Nyheter, so kind of documentary background, I would say. And we also both work at Royal Institute of Art, Konsthögskolan in Stockholm. And that institution also hosted our artistic research project for 3 years, 2017 to 19. We will come back to that, what that means, the formal framework for artistic research, how it's built up and how it works. But that's important, that connection, I would say. So since I graduated, I've been working with my own practice. Here is one example of my work, Tank 1 to 46. It's made more than 20 years ago, and explore the Swedish revival movement and part of Swedish recent history and my own identity, because I had the background in that movement. And I traveled through the countryside in Sweden and documented so-called baptistery tanks. They are no longer existing today, but this work has been presented in exhibition and booths as well. So that was a little bit how we work before we start our research project together. Mm-hmm.
So back to the Refuse to Kill. What is it about? Trying to make a brief introduction of a project that we have been working for since almost 10 years now. So in Refuse to Kill, we investigate a specific segment of recent Swedish history through the testimonies and narratives of conscientious objectors. In other words, those who choose not to perform traditional military service, but applied for and were granted non-combat service. In Swedish it's called vapenfri tjänst. So the right to conscientious objection is the main focus of the project. But it also includes social expectations, norms, gender structure, and the logic of measurability. So these are this project's research questions, which are once again brought up by security policy changes, such as the revival of Swedish conscription, 2017, and most recently, Sweden's application for NATO membership.
So start in our website, homepage. We are going to show you some example of what we have been doing. And we will follow a thread by showing activities that relates to conscription for military service in Swedish värnplikten. That was used in Sweden up to the 1990s. It ended with the Cold War, but now it's once again resumed since 2017, I think. So it's okay. So as Björn mentioned before, we had tried to create an open and transparent interface, which is our website. This is both an archive and a tool to reach outside the art world and outside maybe some kind of research world. And the website can also be seen like a collage of stories, narratives, images, and videos, and documents that can be linked, connected in many different ways. So there is not one way to read this Home's website and all the documents that you can find there. But we have ordered the material in some categories to make it easy to navigate. And one category, for example, is audiovisual material. So maybe we can go there, Björn. And here you find a lot of things. And we will not look into all of this, but we will show you just a brochure from 1982. Where is it? There it is, yes. So this is a picture from a brochure about enrollment, alltså mönstring. And at that time it was for all men. You had to undergo a 2-day enrollment and one's body, intellect, and character determines one's position in the military. So you can see a lot of different tests you have to go through, testing your ears and sight, and also you have like the muscle share somewhere. If you go down here, Björn, there. So yeah, this kind of research we did, and we pick up those images and put them on the website. So if you have another look here, another example, INSARC, it's inskrivningsregistret. In English it would be Enrollment Archive Register. That includes data of all men screened for military service between the years 1969 to 1997. Here the test results from the mönstring enrollment for more than 2.3 million men at the age of 18. This is one of the world's most comprehensive biodata archive, and it's very popular among researchers and from many different fields. So each row here, you can see, represents one person. So if you had mönstrat at that time, you can find your line here. So, and we have also examined real physical objects in our research. For example, the muscle share that you saw also in the brochure. We found one left. There was 12 in Sweden in use, and we find one at Army Museum in their storage in Värtahamnen in Stockholm. So this share is part of the bureaucratic and mechanical apparatus that was designed to measure young men in connection with the enrollment, also med mönstringen. And all the data from this share also ended up in this archive, and so on. This was some examples from our research, and where we looked into different archive, Stockholm City Archive, National Archive of Sweden, that means the Riksarkivet, Karolinska Institutet, and so on. So, with that said, we're now going to have a look, we see a film that we come across during our research when we worked. It's a 3-minute long film, and we just show it, and then we talk about it later.
I asylprocessen är det viktigt att veta en persons ålder. Den är en del av identiteten. Den som är under 18 år är enligt svensk lag ett barn och har särskilda rättigheter. Till exempel rätt till hälso- och sjukvård. I Sverige innebär medicinsk åldersbedömning att vi med hjälp av medicinska metoder försöker avgöra om en person är över eller under 18 år. Medicinsk åldersbedömning kan inte säga exakt hur gammal en person är. Alla asylsökande barn har rätt att gå i skolan. I Sverige gör vi medicinsk åldersbedömning genom att ta en bild på knäleden med magnetkamera. Vi tar också en röntgenbild på visdomständerna. Knä och tänder undersöks eftersom det är tillväxtzoner som mognar gradvis och är färdigutvecklade först i vuxen ålder. Det kan därför ge stöd för bedömningen om en person är över eller under 18 år. Att genomgå en medicinsk åldersbedömning är frivilligt. Därför behöver den asylsökande och ställföreträdaren skriva under en blankett om skriftligt samtycke. Rättsmedicinalverket skickar information till den som ska genomgå undersökningen och till god man. Där förklaras hur man bokar tid. Det görs en kontroll av identiteten av personen som ska undersökas och av ställföreträdarens identitet. När bilderna är tagna och analyserade skickas det till Rättsmedicinalverket för en bedömning om personen är över eller under 18 år. Svaret skickas sedan till Migrationsverket.
Yes, we found this film very disturbing and painful, like a punch below the belt. Of course, the medicine of the medical age assessment as a method has been criticized a lot, not least from the medical profession. We found the film relevant to what we have been looking at earlier, how the state uses various measuring methods when examining individuals for legal purposes. So we wanted to dig a little deeper into this film, and by using the Swedish principle of public access to official documents, which is in Swedish offentlighetsprincipen för allmänna handlingar, we asked the National Board of Forensic Medicine to hand out all documents concerning the making of this film. And at this stage, we did not know anything else than what is to be seen in the information film we just saw together. However, they handed out the full email conversation they had with the film production company hired to make the film. So the conversation includes everything from the announcement and procurement to the finished film and billing, through script work, casting of actors and extra, post-production and distribution. So, I mean, we found the whole conversation
which I'm very exciting. And we decided to collect them and make a publication out of them, like an artist book. And that the book is called, is called Direktupphandling av kortfilm om medicinskadesbedömning. Direct award contracts for a short film about medical age assessment. And here you can follow all documents are in here that we received from Rättsmedicinalverket. And in the publication you can follow the conversation chronological, but we have decided in different chapters, you can see here, that relates to the content of the documents. We also hide the name of people involved, but it's quite easy anyway to understand the name by checking in the context. And we also collaborated with the graphic designer Richard Heberling when we did this. So, what strikes you when you read the documents is that a large part of the conversation only relates to text, how text works in the film. It's about the script, text in the script, text in the voiceover, text for the info at the end, and so on. And there is almost nothing about the footage in the film, what it could mean and how it relates to the content and so on. And nothing about aesthetics consideration regarding the images or where the film was shot, for places and rooms and milieu. So for us working with photography, it was quite upsetting in some way, but at the same time we both, I think, can relate to that, and maybe you also, when you have like a commission and you, maybe that's not an issue when you talk to the commissioner. Can relate to that as a freelance photographer, the conversation here. So, Björn, do you want to say something?
Yeah, maybe it's the time to address what kind of photographic processes are visible or become visible in this work. First, it is, like Johan said, the film assignment. I think it's, as you say, not difficult to identify with this kind of assignments where you're looking for work, you submit expression of interest, you handle budget, you're in contact with the client, trying to be flexible and accommodate their wishes. And as you said also, it's a lot about the textual part of the film in the conversation. But all the visual aspects of the making are only touched on very lightly. So like the visual language, the reportage mode, and the choices made when choosing angle situations, and the atmosphere. And maybe it was this atmosphere that in our view is the most disturbing part of the film, because the atmosphere was so light, it's as if medical age assessment and its possible implications is like a walk in the park. And furthermore, we got quite interested in this format, the information film format, which is not like documentary film, it's not film for cinema, so it's something in between. It's kind of also not so much touched by film historians. It's a format that we found very effective, but also very interesting as to dig in further. But the second one is, of course, the medical photography or the forensic photography, the MRS scan, the X-ray, and it includes like the big apparatus from hospital-like settings. It's editing of images, conclusions drawn from reading of the images, and its consequences. So these more scientific-oriented photographic practices have, as we all know, a strong relation to truth and power, and the client, the National Board of Forensic Medicine, is an expert authority within Swedish juridical system. I think also this photographic practice is easy to identify no matter on what side of the scanner or camera you might be. Yeah, and both these practices, photographic storytelling through a reportage like film or photos, and the scientific use, they both carry a heavy heritage from history and the misuse of power and ethical dilemmas.
Yes. So how is our time? Is it? We have. Okay, but because we just would like to play also an audio piece that we made out of those documents. It's just it is 5 minutes long, but we will hopefully it works. So it's a reading from the script that they used making the film. So it's some part of this script. So, Björn, can you?
Yeah.
You just put yeah.
Medical age assessment. A film about medical age assessment for the Medical Board of Forensic Medicine. Version 5.0. 6th of March 2016. 1. Interior. Bedroom. Morning. Omid, 16, is sleeping restlessly and awakes with a start when the mobile alarm rings. He gets up and grabs his school books from the desk and puts them in his bag. He puts on his headphones and gets out a pair of drumsticks. He places them in the outside pocket of his bag. Omid comes from Afghanistan. Narrator. Voiceover. Friendly, older man. In the asylum process, it is important to know a person's age. It's a part of one's identity. 2. Bedroom 2. Morning. Adan, 17, is sitting by the desk and opens a new page in the black notebook. He begins writing in Somali. 6. Interior. X-ray center. Day. Adan is by the X-ray machine and the radiographer, 4T, is explaining what is about to happen. Narrator. Voiceover. In Sweden, we assess medical age by taking a photograph of the knee joint with an MRI camera. The radiographer prepares to take the photograph. 7. Interior. Dental surgery. Day. The dentist, 35, explains to Mibrihit what's going to happen. Narrator, voice over. We also take an X-ray of the wisdom teeth. The dentists ask Mibrihit to stand still and place the X-ray camera against her face. 8. Interior. Examination day. A person looks at the MRI scans of knees and X-rays of wisdom teeth. Narrator. Voice over. Knees and teeth are examined since they are progress zones that develop gradually and are only fully developed once reaching adulthood. Therefore, they can provide support in determining if a person is over or under the age of 18. 12. Montage. Office. Examination room.
Vi stannar där så vi sparar lite tid. Ursäkta?
English.
Oh, sorry. we cut that to save some time, but you can see that on the whole the video on our website. Yes. But just to make like a conclusion before we leave the floor to you, Cecilia. So our work and research project Refuse to Kill deals with the individual relationship to the state, I would say. One part of it, anyway. We have now looked at some works from our research project also related to photography. Photography in itself is not a subject for us in our research project, but it is often photography as a practice carries inherent meaning and history that is very exciting to explore. And in our project, we came across photography, both from a perspective of the individual as well as a perspective of the state.
Yes, our joint project, which at some times has been funded by a large research fund, Vetenskapsrådet, and can therefore be officially tagged or labeled artistic research. So we will, after Cecilia's presentation, have the possibility to talk about this field, artistic research, with the starting point that we have not ourselves necessarily negotiated a perfectly consistent view on this, or what it could be. And we will maybe, or hopefully never, do so. So, thank you for listening.
Tack så jättemycket för... Oh, sorry, I forgot to speak in English. Thank you so much for that really interesting presentation and arresting work. And actually, this is the first time that we are talking. So we want to also say a big thank you to CFF who invited us to come and have this conversation, because it's a really great opportunity also for us to discuss these questions that we don't really discuss so often. And I also want to say that CFF is very close to my heart, because it's the first place I ever exhibited in Sweden. I did my studies in the UK, although I am from Gothenburg. And it's also the first organization that exhibited the very, very first parts of this project that I'm going to present today. So CFF has been there all the way. Yes. And as Johan and Björn are at the end of their project, I am right in the middle. And it's also a project that we are two main collaborators. And the second collaborator is called Fredrik Simba, and he lives in Kinshasa, so he couldn't be here with us today. But he is... So it's also a collaborative project between two people. And I would say that my presentation is probably a lot more chaotic, because working on a large project, we have a 1-year COVID extensions, we are on year 3 out of 4. It's right at this kind of point where there seems to be lots of threads going in different directions, and we're not quite sure how they intersect or which ones to pull. But basically, our project is centered around a trove of glass plate negatives that were photographed by Swedish missionaries in the Congo between 1890 and 1930. And my own engagement with this story started here at Persbo Studio, which is today a sculpture park. Me and the artist Anna Ekman got a commission to make a public sculpture for the sculpture park, although we are both photographers working with photography, usually. And we started doing research about this house and found that most of the activities that happened there were around collecting funds for the missionary project in the Congo. And this was the starting point for the project Les Archives Suédoises. And we were really interested in these glass plate images we found in the archive, because somehow it's sort of, we somehow had some kind of half subconscious memory of hearing about the Congo and about the missionary history. And when we did a bit more research, we saw that actually the Swedish missionary exhibition, traveling exhibition, is one of the most seen exhibitions in the sort of exhibition history of Sweden. Because this bus was traveling from the early 19th century up until the the 1960s, and actually there was a caravan that kept going into the 2000s, but that was run by a private individual. So, so the church, they sent out camera equipment with the missionaries, and then they used the images to entice the home parishes to donate funds, because this was Svenska Missionsförbundet, so it was not aligned with the Swedish government. It was an initiative that was really based within a lot of parishes all around Sweden. So these images were, for a lot of people, the first time perhaps they met something from the African continent. But of course the images were staged not to tell the story from an African perspective, but to sort of put the missionaries in the position as savior, as a hero, etc. And so we were interested in what could be done with these images today. And we asked the archivists at the archive, is there any access to these images in the Congo today? And he said, no, we own their history. And because of the wars, because of the climate, because of course, the colonizers controlled the technology, prints were not really brought back. Sometimes a few prints, but mostly the glass negatives were transported back to Sweden and stayed here. And we came across this material at a really specific time, because Svenska Missionsförbundet had decided to sell off their archive. So they were shipping everything to other archives in Sweden. So that was like the golden moment we as artists could turn up with a suitcase asking, can we please borrow some? And they were, yeah, you could just, they weren't even sure if they still had the negatives. So we were sort of going through their archive and borrowing some. And we started digitizing, and we went to the Congo trying to find collaborators in the Congo, and also to see whether there was an interest in this image material. Because of course it's a difficult history, it's colonial imagery. It's not pleasant to look at. But we found that the interest was very strong in the Congo, and we found a collaborator, Freddy Simba, and his family comes from this area. Here you could see the underlined villages are where the Swedish missionaries were. And here is a quote from the former head of the National Museum in the Congo, and he says, I actually think it's the missionaries we should hold responsible. The missionaries should stand trial, because they came to evangelize, and it was they who declared our object fetishes, worthless objects that they burned. But they were clever. They took the best artifacts, put them in their luggage, and took them with them. And this is also something that the Swedish missionaries did. So there are images in Jönköpings Länsmuseum. If you ever go there, you can see an image of this kind of pile. So when people, for people to be baptized, they needed to bring their traditional objects to the missionaries. And then they made, in the beginning they made fires, but actually Lotta Gustafsson-Reinius, who's a researcher at the Etnografiska Museum, she's found that they must have saved some from the piles, because she's found the same objects in Etnografiska. And what none of us knew when we started this project is that out of 40,000 objects in Etnografiska Museet och Världskulturmuseet, 10,000 comes from this particular area of the Congo. So that's a really large amount. And so we made a series of exhibitions together, collaborative exhibitions, that were also published in a book that was published by Matilda, who is back here holding the book, and very beautiful publication. And so we were interested in seeing what could happen if we looked at a few of these negatives, but really, really closely, to try and unpick what they actually depicted. And we were also really interested in seeing those moments that had been deemed unusable. So, for instance, these images that are in this exhibition, we found on an envelope marked unusable, so they had never been printed before. And here is the exhibition in Kinshasa and Jönköpings Länsmuseum. I didn't actually bring a photo from CFF, but but it's the same exhibition. And so we published a book and we made a series of exhibitions, and we also had an idea that we wanted to give the negatives that we had digitized back. And also when we went to Kinshasa, we started working with Freddie, we saw that the interest was really, really tremendous there. But our kind of naive idea when we did this first project was that we could just put them on a hard drive and we could hand it over, or we could maybe put it online, or that would sort of solve the problem. We brought some prints, and we had a small repatriation exhibition in one of the villages that the images that were photographed in. But we could see that there was no place to leave prints, there were no computers. In fact, there was no electricity nor any mobile reception in a lot of these source villages. And this is despite them being very, very close to the Inga dams. I don't know if any one of you know, it's a very, very big power plant, but the power is just shipped elsewhere. So in a way, in this project, it was successful because we were able to make all these exhibitions, and we had a lot of public discussions, but we hadn't managed to solve this very difficult problem with how do you give the images back in a way that actually gives them back, not just you hand over a hard drive and then it's in a drawer and no one can see it. Together with Freddie Zimba, we made a new application to Vetenskapsrådet to try and get, to do a research project, really thinking about this. How do you deal with this kind of question? How can you as artists be a part of this image repatriation or repatriation process? And how can you also as artists work across cultures? What does it mean to work in two different cultures around this image material that actually is very relevant for both our countries? And how can we create a new archive? Because of course these negatives were sitting in archive boxes, but they hadn't been catalogued. And how could we then catalog them today in a way that doesn't replicate this kind of colonial archive logic, but actually is catalogued in a way that would be interesting and useful and accessible to people in the Congo? So that's, this is an image just to show you what kind of captions these images came with. This is from Skiopticon, one of those touring exhibitions. And it says, vegetation path. So the person in the image is just there. He doesn't come into the caption. And this is something that we found a lot, again and again. We have another image that says missionary on a walk, but it's actually 3 people in the photograph. So, of course, to put these kind of labels, to transfer them straight into a new archive is not making an interesting, good archive that would be useful or interesting for people in the Congo today. So we managed to get the funding, and the first part that started was the archival work, and this is a photo. By now, the collection had been sent over to the Ethnographic Museum, and these are the moving boxes, how they were just sitting there. Because, of course, Ethnographiska, they don't have a lot of funds. And I found this also very interesting, that the way museums digitize is that they are sent off maybe somewhere close to, somewhere in the countryside. Maybe it's people who have a work training. So it's not people that are specialized that do the digitization. And the search words are actually written by the people who digitize. And there's no one at the museum who has time to go through and see what kind of search words you end up having. So we made an agreement with Ethnographiska that we would digitize a big part of their collection, or as much as we could. And they would also get access to these image files afterwards. But the first step would be to give them back to the communities of origin. So they sort of agreed to not put them up in their search system before that was done, which I thought was a nice thing. And myself and Anna had also, so we had to contact all the heirs of the missionary photographers to get permission to use their images. Sometimes, a lot of the times it was not really clear who had photographed, but sometimes we knew. So we contacted all of the heirs of the people that we knew to tell them about the project and to get their permission to work with the images. And then we also came across with this private archive of Johan Hammar, which were really amazing images, and he also was very particular at writing down, and these had been sitting in someone's attic for a very, very long time. So that was also part of the digitization. And then COVID hit, just as we were getting started, and the institutions closed, and we couldn't travel, so that put a bit of a spanner in the works. But then we weren't spending any money either, so all of a sudden we realized that we had enough money to digitize films, because there were 24 boxes of films from the Congo that were photographed between 1914 and 1930. So we could send them off to be digitized. And here are some images. So they were uncut rushes that had been copied onto safety film. And as you can see, one of them says vinegar smell, and that's the beginning of the decaying process of the films. So they were also, you think that in the archive things are permanent, but of course it's not like that. So these films were actually very difficult to digitize, and some had to be sent off to the UK for special scanning because they had been stretched. And then when we got the digital files, everything was in a complete mess. Nothing was just random cuts copied together, which in part was very interesting, because it's very interesting, just as you go back to the uncut negative or uncropped negative, it's very interesting for us as artists to go back to the uncut film reels, that it's not actually the missionary film that has been cut together, but also all these cuts that were rejected at the time. And we arranged a screening at Sita Bio in Stockholm with the son of one of the photographers who's sitting there with his wife. And so he looked through one of the films that was in good condition, together with Freddie Timba and myself. And then he made notes of all the rushes, because he grew up in Congo and he had seen a lot of his father's work, so he could identify where a lot of things had been photographed. And we also spent time at Riksarkivet. So there's a lot of links in terms of working method with Carl Johan and Björn's projects, where we found notebooks written by Congolese, also in the beginning of the 19th century. And this is very, very unique documentation that doesn't exist really anywhere else. So these were some of the first young students that were scholarized by the Swedish missionaries, were asked to write sort of ethnographic, go out to villages and write these ethnographic notebooks. And there is a lot of material there, and we are probably not going to be able to, in this project, deal with a lot of it. But this one notebook we have digitized, and we have someone who's now trying to what do you call it? Annotate it? No, to type it, basically, so it can be translated. And what's interesting in it is also that you have the missionaries' notes as another second layer. And there's pages with crossings, and he writes what he finds interesting. And so that was our sort of raw material. And then we started thinking about how to show this, because of course this time we had much more material and really varied material. How can we bring it back to the villages and create this new kind of archive, and how can we sort of get people to look at these images and for them to write what they see in the images? We have the Congolese version, because in the Swedish archives we have the Swedish version, we have the diaries of the missionaries, but we don't really have the Congolese side. Should I just see what the time, am I doing okay for time? Yeah. And so we made the very first prototype we made together with a student at KTH, Nadia Campo-Wojcik, who helped us make this. It's like a torch-driven small slide projector. So we made these wooden kind of slides, and you can put the torch in, and you can project it onto the wall, or you can use it during the day as a slide viewer. So it has dual functions. And it was very lovely in that it had this kind of material quality, in that you put the slides in and out. And so we had like a trial screening and a discussion about whether doing screenings, is that the best way to show this material today, or should it be more of an individual experience? And all the feedback we got from this trial was that it's very nice to do projection because it ties in with this collaborative culture. But actually, the quality wasn't good enough in this very beautiful lo-fi, nice little projector, but people wanted to enlarge. So instead, people sort of got up and walked closer to the wall, and someone wanted to repair the wall to make the image nicer. And so we decided this wasn't the way to continue. So we went digital. It's less charming, but we found a battery-driven projector that actually had quite good quality, so we could be charged. And then we made actually an app for the iPad. And because the material we had was so vast, we had to find a system so that wasn't dependent on scraps of paper, so we could collect all these material around the images and films, and then they could be fed into a kind of archive object that can be an object that will be deposited in the source villages, a battery-run object. So we've done a lot of individual workshop or memory sessions. And this is with the great-grandson of the man who wrote the notebook you saw earlier, which is why that's the notebook we will start by transcribing, of course, because we know that he's very interested. And here, it was really nice that he was able to enlarge this photograph with his great-grandfather in, because he actually has the same sword in his hand today. So that was a very beautiful moment. And what we found was that we would go to the villages and we would ask if there were old men or women and that were willing to come and sit down and talk to us about the images. And we also paid them always, because we felt that they were sharing their knowledge with us. And that's a work that we wanted to remunerate. And in general, when we conceived of this project, it's very hard, Sweden is a very wealthy country. Vetenskapsrådet is it's a big institution. How can you work with a very poor country? How can you do a collaboration that still feels relatively equal to all the participants? So how of course it can't ever really be, but how we try to get around that as much as possible is to be very transparent, do the budgets together, make the decisions about where our money goes. And everyone's salary is based on my salary at Konstfack, where I'm a lecturer in photography, which I forgot to say. So that's kind of a principle that we try to stick with, just to try and make it as fair as possible. And here is an image of what the app looks like. So this app is not the finished archive. This is a collection app that we've developed, and we're still on prototype mode, but it will be released on the App Store, so other people can use it for their projects. So you have it's basically like a filing dictionary where you can put in information. And here you see a series of names, and those are the people that have left their memories or their recollections of what they think this image is of. And you can then go and tap on the names to get to their information. And so the first time when we tried the app, we thought that we would write it, that someone would be writing, but then we realized, no, that's actually a total nightmare to try and write, and especially for we have an assistant who runs the app when we do workshops, and he's not very used to typing, so yeah, that was not a good idea. So then we introduced an audio recording function. So now we can actually record audio clips with each image, and then it's very easy to see that the right clip is by the right image then when we go to make it into an archive. And then these audio clips are transcribed, and they are in Kikongo or in Lingala, so there are two different languages that they are in. And so we transcribe them. Lingala is the language that most people speak in the Congo, but not everyone. There are 5 official languages. And Kikongo is the language of the area these photographs are from. So we have, for now, they are in 3 languages. They're transcribed into 3 languages. But of course, we want to translate it into Swedish or English. We haven't made a decision. It's complicated so many languages. And here is another workshop with Tata Tekasala, who had a lot of beautiful history. So often we sit down for 3-4 hours with the people that give their stories. But then we also do public screenings. So we have done a lot of public screenings. And as you see here, it's very, very simply done. We have a sheet, we put it up, and we do the screening. And what we started to do, because of course we are developing our method as we go along. So what we started doing in the last trip, which was in June, is that we started inviting these, if we found people that had a lot of knowledge about history in the individual workshops, we invited them to sort of present the screening. So this screening was presented by this village elder, Louis Joseph, and he was really the oral history caretaker of the memory of this village called Vivi, which is the first capital in the Congo. So he had these beautiful stories to share then with the younger people in the village. And it's really interesting to see how these images and films that we found, I find really difficult and uncomfortable to look at a lot of the times, how they can be very, very useful in terms of healing something. And Freddy Tsimba talks about this, that in the Congo it's like there's a really violent rupture between our contemporary times and historical times, which of course has to do with colonization. And even though these images and films can't completely heal that, they can make some kind of bridge, because even in schools, and I was surprised and shocked and saddened to hear this, but the kids don't really get to study Congolese history, they study European history. There isn't really history books, there isn't really any kind of materials available. So for a lot of people, this might be the first time they have seen images of village life. And also the Congo, it's not a country where you can really travel very easily. It's very expensive, it's very, very difficult to travel. So most young people living in Kinshasa, maybe they have gone to one of the other big cities, but they haven't really seen village life. So the images are getting very different reactions when we are showing them in Kinshasa and in the villages. And should I click once more to put on the film, or? Yeah. So this is just a film of one of the screenings.
What language do you speak when you have this presentation?
Well, when we are in the villages, I'm not the one standing animating it. That's done by either Freddy, who's from the local area, or one of the local people that I speak French. I speak learning a little bit of Lingala, some words in Kikongo, but not enough to, I can be polite. But I wanted to show you this because I think this really illustrates this film clip, this story so well. Because I think this film clip is currently running at Etnografiska Museet, if I'm not mistaken, in their collections. It shows a master Nyombo maker. A Nyombo is like a funerary sculpture that contains the body of an important person. And this was a tradition that was forbidden by the Belgian colonization. And this film clip by Josef Örneman, the father of the son who you saw earlier, is the only time it's been filmed by anyone. So this is very, very unique footage. And it has been shown in many museums around the world. It was shown at the Metropolitan Museum, for instance. People have been writing about it, researchers from all over the world. I mean, Josef Örneman became quite famous because he had filmed this. But it had never, ever been shown in the village of origin before. So this was the first time. You can hear the audience. And of course, it has to do with, this is the religion. I mean, it goes against what the local church wants. So this would not be one of the images that the church would choose to bring back, even today. And so people in the villages have been either not told at all about it. Most of the young people, or most of the people in the audience, had no idea what this was. And the man being filmed, you put his name into Google and you will find many art historians writing about his work. But in the area where he's from, the knowledge has been totally eradicated. And Portuguese sociologist De Sousa Santos, he talks about this as epistemicide, and I think this is such a good, sad example of that kind of. But we can move on, and this is. These are two of the older band. They were both over 80 in Kingoye, where the clip was filmed, describing seeing this process when they were young. So he's talking about drying the corpse, how it's being dried before it goes into this kind of shape. Take a month, and things would just fall out of the corpse. So, and they were able then, when we did the screening, to tell the whole village about this story. And here is a Nyombo made by the same Nyombo master. It's in the permanent exhibition at the Museum of World Culture in Gothenburg. This is a female Nyombo with a baby, but it's made by Makosa, and this has been it has been borrowed to the Museum of Metropolitan Art, and it was considered the masterpiece of a big exhibition they had there maybe 15 years ago. And here is Freddie Zimba in the Ethnographic Museum in Stockholm with Michael Barrett, who's the Africa curator, because also the Ethnographic Museum has one of these heads made by Makosa, the great master. And so we made, I couldn't remember the word, is it called a photogrammetry? You know, where you make a 3D shape from photographs? I think photogrammetry. Anyway, so that we were able to make a very simple cast in aluminium from old engine parts. A head. It's not the original. It's not the return of the original, but it's the return of something. And at least I think we are artists. We can't negotiate the return of artifacts. But what we can do is we can raise an interest, and we can make people aware of what there is and what has been lost. And I think to make this shape, it does something else than to have it, because it brings it into today in a different way than the black and white images and the films. So that's a few of all these confusing threads that we are pulling at the same time. And I just thought maybe it's interesting to think about the difference of what it was, because we did this project as an art project, collaborative art project, and then we moved it into a research project. And what's the difference between the two, and is there a difference? I mean, these are all questions that we're going to be discussing now. But for myself, I made this very easy sketch of how I see it, so that maybe a research project stands on sort of equal footing between your own practice and the theory that you're drawing on. And the methodology kind of leads you into your methods, and there somewhere at the top is the project that then ends with the aims. And here I realized I forgot to fill in the aims. I mean, I don't know what that says, but all these kind of activities and what theoretical sources we've been drawing on, I've just tried to sort of map them into that, just to kind of conceptualize it a little bit more. And I don't know if it's helpful for you to see in terms of thinking. Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, so how shall we do this now? Pelle, you have a microphone if anyone in the audience have any questions.
Yes, I do. Please, thank you very much, Cecilia, Johan, and Björn, for very, very, very interesting presentations. Yes, do you have any questions here? Yeah. Oh, you first, and then you.
Yes, thank you again. Super interesting. Quite early in your presentation, you were talking about how little research there has been, or how little discussion and writing about that genre of film that you were investigating, information film. Mm. And it made me think of what was the actual purpose of was that described in the kind of, you know, when they were commissioning this film? Was it information? Who was it directed to? Was it the immigrants who were supposed to? Because at some point it seemed like there's you have to go and do this, or it's on your own free will. It seems strange to make it. It seems more close to propaganda in a way, that it's the kind of a justification of something, which kind of connects it to also the question to you is why the missionaries made these. What were the kind of, it's maybe difficult to know, but they made exhibitions that were touring, talking about what they were doing. I was just curious to hear if you have thoughts about the kind of information film connected to propaganda, or the purposes of the makers of these images and archives.
Thank you, Magnus. I think we have to, maybe we can fill in all on this, but maybe a very easy answer is to read the book, because in the like call, there is quite a strict structure who the film is for. Actually, it was supposed to be animated film, but it ended up to be with real actors instead, and so on. But I think it was directed towards the young people as a way of understanding what am I going to go through if I sign up for having this medical age assessment, but also for the, I don't know the English word, the gode man, their legal, I don't know. Guardian, yeah, so for them to understand. But maybe it's also, I mean, then you can speculate a little more on why do you produce this kind of material in the first place. Maybe it's also a way to safeguard that we have informed you about your rights. You can do this, but you choose not to. I mean, that's more speculation from my side. Johan, will you fill in?
No, maybe. I mean, we just heard from asylum-seeking young people that saw. They were very upset when they saw it, the film. So I don't know if it's was functioning in the film, but as Björn said, maybe that the state institution just had to do the information, so then they were safe, even though it didn't work so well.
Yeah, but I think.
But we don't know. Maybe it works also. Maybe a lot of people see it and here is good information. We cannot say.
No, we cannot say. But most state authorities, including ours, we have a quite universities. We have regulation papers saying you have to inform about your activities. You cannot be not transparent either. So I think it's I don't know. State has its own logic, including this strange film.
And yeah, I would say that with the missionary photographers, the reason why the missionary church decided to send cameras was they actually had a tradition of using multimedia. They had hand-drawn skiopticon lectures with biblical scenes, etc. before photography, and they were quite quick at adapting photography. And it was because they were totally dependent on funds from the parishes. And photography was a very, very effective tool of communication. And you see a lot, we were quite curious about that. We see a lot of the times, the missionaries, the missionary photographer, for instance, Josef Örneman, he appears in so many images, so he must have had helpers pressing the button. So it was very much about iscensätta. I how do you say that?
Stage.
Yes, like staging some kind of scenes. But then you could also see that some of the missionary photographers were more successful at making images than others. So you could also see how they get into it for the sake of photography, how they were interested in image making. So I think it's a double thing. And sometimes, of course, they make images of completely unsuitable things. So you have a lot.
Yeah, and here's your next question.
I have a question more maybe for Cecilia, but maybe you can fill in. I thought this part about European history being very present in education in Congo, and about like this part where the missionaries took objects to Sweden, and then I was wondering more about the reactions from the locals or from the villages when they saw this, that they were totally removed from their history, and also you as Swedes bringing it back, if there were any reactions to that, or since also you talked about the church being part of this whole maybe reaction of colonial history, so just more about the reactions from the locals, if it how it was received.
Yeah, thank you. It's very entangled. It's not one thing or the other. It's very complicated because Sweden still has a lot of ties through the church, and the church is very often a partner in SIDA projects, for instance. So the church, and for instance, now there are some Swedish missionaries in some of these villages, and they are nurses, and they bring means still, and they might set up a laboratory in a hospital, and so it's a double feeling of kind of wanting more of that kind of help because life there is very difficult. So maybe being, and of course people there are very Christian. But then once you start bringing, so if you have a conversation with people just like this, they might tell you more of the positive things. But once people start looking at the images, and then they see the suffering, and also the work that they're, because what you see in a lot of the images and the films is actually the work put in by Congolese and by children, no less. You see a lot of work done by children in the building of these structures. So then that brings up other kinds of feelings, because of course people start remembering, my grandfather talked about this, they never got paid. And then when we move to the objects, I think there is a growing sense of wanting to get things back in the Congo, definitely. And now the Belgian king and queen had a state visit in the Congo this summer, and they gave something back, one thing from this big museum in Brussels. But then there were all these stories going around. People were sure it was fake. It looked much smaller than it looked at. There was a real big distrust in terms of will they actually hand things back. So, but it's mixed. It's a very mixed field. And you find we had even a pastor saying, they took our history and they replaced it with Jesus. That wasn't well done. And this was a pastor. But at the same time, the church there is also reluctant to be too implicated because they're still dependent. So yeah, it's complicated. Yeah.
Maybe it's possible to address your question also from our perspective. I think there's some linkage to similarities, like we are labeled artists and researchers, but we kind of work a little like historians too, and archivists, and all those professions, they have their own logic, so to speak, and responsibilities. So I think also if we go back to our presentation, that we felt the need to be visual with this homepage was that we were asking people to contribute. One difference between our projects is that most of the men, the around 40,000 men that did this non-military service, many of them are still alive. So you can ask for permission. Do you want to participate? And they could just, no, I don't want to. But if they want to, they can do it. So that's like a difference. They could just either hear the call or ignore it. So.
Maybe I can just stick in. I mean, we're dealing with we collect stories and publicate it on our website, And one way to do that for us, to be legal, so to speak, to get away from this GDPR, was to make it like a publication, the whole site. So then it's, vi blir ansvariga utgivare. And that was a way
to get around,
to publish stories and things like that. So maybe that's not the usual thing for a regular researcher, but for us, maybe we don't follow the strict rules creating research, I think, as artists.
Can I just add something on that, which I think is related, and I think that's something, it's kind of maybe it's a problem when you move, when you're an artist and you move into research, because in research there's, you have to share your research materials. I mean, we are publicly funded, we should of course share our research material, but that's also the base material for our art making. But it's that kind of responsibility, you know, you've worked for 3 or 4 years on something, you've amassed all this research, but you also where do you deposit it afterwards? What do you do with it? And I guess you have solved that by, or you haven't?
Yeah, for a few years in the future, but not finally. No.
Well, at some point when we had this collection seminar, people came with images and photos, but we choose not to keep them, but to digitize them, because it's also this responsibility. Once you have a collection, who's going to carry it to the future? Is it me, or is it my grandchildren, or is it who's going to? What kind of heavy bag do you carry on through life after you asked for people to give you things? That's something we thought quite a lot of.
Yeah, maybe we distributed through our publications. We made several books as well, so that could be a way to spread it.
Did you have a question, Pelle?
Yes, I do. In context of Refuse to Kill, I maybe would say this is like a loaded gun. How about artistic research? What is it really? I mean, that could be, we could talk about that for 5 days in a row. But the foundings of your 2 projects are done from Vetenskapsrådet, which is like the research council in Sweden. And that is very important to understand. That is a new kind of way of finding ways of having money for your projects, and it's been kind of hard to get it before. I mean, you, Cecilia, you have a PhD, which is a doktorsexamen in Swedish, and Johan, you don't have. Björn, you don't have. I don't have, and it's a sort of a problem also, because when you're coming from the more PhD in a scientific way, it's been usually been going on for many years, but now it's kind of new way of getting foundings through VR. That's the shortcut for Vetenskapsrådet, for artistic research projects. So can you, if I'm putting on my hat like I'm a photographer, in what way could I go in the same paths as you? I mean, is it possible? Do you have other possibilities openings up for artists in here, in this room? Just want to address this question. What do you think about this way? Can you give any tips or about this, how this could go on for maybe, this is interesting. I have something in my pocket. Maybe I could develop that to something broader.
I could jump in. I think, of course, having a PhD helps because you're used to writing. And the thing about getting funding for a research project is unlike a lot of other funding. They don't really look at your visual materials. You submit a CV, but not necessarily image materials, as it is now. So you have to have a good writing. So the first thing I would do if I didn't have a PhD, and PhDs are very hard to get into. There are very few programs. So that's not a realistic route for most people, actually. But there are, I think, some courses, forskningsförberedande, like preparatory research courses for professionals that are run by different art academies. So I would look for a course like that, because I think it is helpful to have some help along the way in terms of how to structure a proposal. There is a lot of material online for how to structure and I think another tip is to, this is all public. You could just contact the registrar at Vetenskapsrådet, order 10 applications of projects that are interesting to you, read them. You can start getting an idea of how these kind of things are written, and then look for smaller grants. If I think about how we financed our whole big project, it was really like a patchwork of funding. We got a little bit of funding from Författarfonden to travel, a little bit from Konstnärsnämnden to make exhibitions, a little bit from Stockholms stad to make exhibitions, and then we got a little bit more from Postkodlotteriet. So those were like the small funding blocks that we were able to sort of use to then have the time to do more research and be able to put a bigger funding bid in. So that would be my top tips. Yeah.
Maybe I would say also, I mean, this is a window of opportunity right now because of the Swedish Research Council, Vetenskapsrådet, is open for application without a PhD. So because we haven't that, so that's great. But I mean, it could change in the future.
It could
probably will,
yeah,
but
because
we don't know.
It's the only form of research actually funded by Vetenskapsrådet where you don't have to have a PhD, and that is because they haven't been around for very long. So.
And I would say just more in general, I mean, as an artist, as we worked before, we also worked as a kind of research, a form of research, I would say. So it's not so big step to, and just about our school, we have like an open call. Everyone can hand in and submit an idea that they want to base a project on. So, and then there is a committee who look at it, and if it's good, it's not so much what it's about. It's more the quality of the. Yeah. And then you can go through, because this is a way for the schools, the university, högskola, to bring in money as well to their. So they need also those good applications.
Yeah. And that also goes for Konstfack, because you have to have an institutional partner. You have to be hosted by an institution, but also Konstfack are open for suggestions and
from outside.
From the outside. And I don't know what it's like in Gothenburg.
Same thing.
Same thing. So it's a matter of contacting the responsible for research and start a dialogue. And I think if you are accepted, then you can also be part of the grant writing process.
Yeah,
at
I
least
think
at
also,
Konstfack.
and also you can collaborate.
Yeah.
You don't have to do it alone.
And that would be another important tip. Is of course to collaborate, and that's one of the really great things I find when being part of it's much easier to collaborate with other researchers, because you can put in joint bids. You can work with an historian, or you could work with anyone you could think about, so you could collaborate with people at other institutions as well. So
maybe I can add a little also. I mean, why do you need a host, like an institution that hosts your project? So one very important aspect of research is that you share your knowledge. And let's say if you get money and you live in Småland in a cottage, how are you going to share it? Of course you can share it even if you sit in my cottage in Småland, but the idea of research is to be like we are now, in a dialogue with others. So that's one part. And and maybe to add on how to get this, is to really set aside time, because it takes time. And I think I got one, actually it was a professor at your school who held a lecture about artistic research maybe 10 years ago. Try to be bold. Don't do the things that already done. So you have to find something, like a niche where you want to, try something new.
Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe we should add also, I mean, this kind of research is not about art and photography, it's through our, through photography. And so it's and as artists, you have your tools within you, in your processes already.
Yeah.
So in our case, it was that we started to think about doing non-military service. It was like no one talked about that, but this was before Russia's more aggressive movements and the fear from us in Sweden to. And then we found out no one had written about this quite a lot. That there were a lot of people engaged in the peace movement and engaging in these issues, and we thought it was quite quiet about that. So we wanted just wanted to research that. I mean, there was a question, and we wanted to get some answers. So to find those.
Yeah, but it's almost that, isn't it?
Empty.
It's identifying a gap and then step into that gap and do something. And I just want to add something else as well, and that is that the approval rates, if you do hand in an application to Vetenskapsrådet, the approval rates for artistic research are incredibly low. I don't remember what the percentage is, but it's, I don't know, could be maybe 8% approval. And then you have to consider that all of the applications have gone through an internal process at the universities as well. And that is not to say that our applications were so good. It's more to say that if the application rate is so low, in the end it's so low that it actually becomes a bit random what gets funding or not. And I think that's actually quite a good thing to keep in mind, that it's too low. Every year there are applications that are very, very good that don't get funded, basically. So don't be discouraged. Just keep trying, basically, because,
And I mean, it's not only for visual art. This is about, you compete with people from the music,
dance,
opera, dance, and it's a big
architecture
field, what you call artistic research from many different areas. So you compete with them as well.
I thought it was really exciting to hear about your project. I want to share something later, but it's so really exciting. And you're in the middle of your project, and you said we were at the end. But actually, we think we're at still some beginning, because, as you said, there are so many threads, and there is so little time and money.
Actually, that's the question I wanted to ask you. Do you feel like you're finished now? Is this?
No,
but then,
not really. No, I mean, especially now, as we said, the NATO membership, the shifting idea. I mean, I think it might be a change of thinking also around young people at the age of 18 now than rather. We did a survey actually 2-3 years ago about how young people at the age of 18 think about entering the military now. I think there is a constant change in this very big question about the military, the defense, the nation, and the right to kill in the name of. So I think it's a never-ending story.
Here's a question.
Yes, so this is related to the things we were talking about, knowledge sharing and so on. Can you hear me? Yes? No?
A little louder, please.
A little bit louder. Okay. So I was just wondering about, in my mind, I was thinking, how is this information really shared within the artistic research community? Because I'm halfway through a PhD education, but it's in urban studies. And for example, my supervisors, they're constantly on me to define your field, do a literature review, and understand who you're talking to and what knowledge you will build on and how you will share it. But there's like a big infrastructure around that with citations and so on. And I can really see the point of going outside of that system. But again, it's also a bit, how can this kind of building on knowledge kind of keep on building on other people's knowledge situation be put in place in this artistic research?
I can try and answer that, which is a really good question, and I think it's something that we who are in the field can also notice, that artistic research hasn't been very good at building on other people's previous knowledge. I know that there is not so many applications in artistic knowledge that are actually citing other previous projects. But there is beginning to be more of an infrastructure around it. There is it's a research catalog where you can do, it's like a platform where you can do, in a way, like visual, like a paper, but based around visual materials. That a lot of people are, and a lot of journals in this field are beginning to use these kind of visuals, because you've done that, right?
Yeah, we have been published in 2 different journals online that are peer-reviewed, and one Vies and Pars in Gothenburg.
Yeah.
So there is some structure for that, but I mean also we as artists, we have a platform beside normal research to reach out through exhibitions, for example, and we have like another platform maybe than traditional research, which is great. Oh.
Yeah. And I would say that I've given a lot of conference presentations as well, because I think for me that has been a really interesting place to meet researchers from other fields, interdisciplinary. Where maybe there are not so many other artists that present, and maybe my presentation is a little bit sort of left field for a lot of people, but it's interesting because it does build those kind of dialogues.
Okay.
But actually, do we have time? I have a question for you, if we have time, and that is, have you exhibited this project?
Mm-hmm.
So you have made.
Yeah, we have made several exhibitions at different places, and Konstakademin in Stockholm, for example, but also smaller galleries, and we have made exhibitions, and so, but also we made publications. So Björn, maybe you want to finish this about talking about.
But did you think especially about the project we showed now? Yeah, I think the most successful presentation was maybe at this place called Film Forum in Stockholm, where we had a similar screening as we had now, and then we had invited guests with different perspective reading the film. So one film historian kind of, and one medical doctor, and one artist, So it was quite. I think that was a very good format, not to just, because it's also like this, you don't want to send this movie out, it's out there already, so it's more to contextualize the film and to talk about it. And one way was to do this, and another way, which is the publication. And actually, we do hand out this to you today because we don't want to sell it, because it's for various reasons we don't want to make any money on this. But I was going to say something that I dropped now. But anyway, we have showed it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you can take a copy of this book if you would like, and we have other publications, but they cost 100 crowns each. So, yeah.
Wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Is it? Vad är klockan?
Ja, den är...
Is it time for another question or reflection or?
Well then, thank you so much for listening.
So it will be now over for 7 minutes. So we are really in a good time. So say thank you very, very much.